Well, Mark, first I want to say thanks so much for being on the show. Really looking forward to the conversation.
As am I.
So I got to start off with this, which is, I read that you're a death and dying expert, and you don't hear that every day, a death and dying expert. So, in your words, what does that mean?
Well, it means that for 35 years, I focused on suicide prevention, and none of my patients died by suicide. And I also did house calls to dying patients because one of my early mentors was a fellow named Dr. Ed Schneidman, Shneidman, and he was at UCLA, and he's probably one of the top 5 pioneers in suicide prevention, but also in death and dying. So he would refer me people that I guess he had confidence in me, but he'd refer me people that a lot of other people didn't want to see because they were a little bit scary.
Scary in what way?
Well, the suicidal patients that they'd kill themselves when they're out of the hospital.
Mm, wow. It's a heavy responsibility. I mean, is that something, how did you get into that? Was that an area you were interested in or just compassion for these individuals?
Well, look, there's always a backstory to people. And my backstory is um, when I was going through med school, I dropped out twice and finished. That's kind of unusual. And I dropped out because I think I had untreated depression. And so the first time I took a leave of absence, they allow you to do that because people get stressed out in law school and med school, and they, give them a year off, hope they get their act together. And what happened is I took off for a year, got a little bit better, came back, and then I relapsed. So I came back, and the depression came back, and I was highlighting every book and hoping I could hold on to the material, which I had trouble with. So I was at a pretty low point. And my parents did the best they could, but my dad, had sort of a rough, childhood. So he tended to be kind of critical. Empathy was not his strong suit. And so the second time I wanted to drop out, and I was fortunate, I was passing everything. And I met with the head of the school, the dean of the school, and I don't even remember the meeting, but then I got a call from the dean of students who said, I've got a letter here from the main dean. You got to come in and we'll read it together. And so I go in there, and the letter from the main dean said, I met with Mr. Goulston. We talked about other careers, and I'm advising the promotions committee that he be asked to withdraw. And I'm at a low point. And I said,
Right.
what does this mean? And the dean of students said, you've been kicked out. And I kind of cratered in front of him. I mean, I went, whoa. And that was one of my first experiences of the power of just pure vulnerability without helplessness. I didn't say, well, what am I going to do? And there was just something open about that. And then he hit me with what I call the trifecta of hope. And he said, and these were his words. He said, Mark, you didn't mess up. You're passing everything, but you are messed up. But if you got unmessed up, I think this school would be glad they gave you a second chance. Because the reason they wanted to kick me out is because they were losing matching funds. So tuition doesn't just go, tuition isn't enough to cover the costs of educating a student.
Okay.
And so he said, but you are messed up. And then here, this is what I call the trifecta of hope. He said, but even if you don't get unmessed up, even if you don't become a doctor, Even if you don't do anything with the rest of your life, I'd be proud to know you. I went, what? And I can give you a little backstory about why would he be proud to know me.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, so the first leg was like an unconditional belief in me,
Mm.
for I guess goodness, for what lack of a better word. He
Okay.
said, I'd be proud to know you, because you have something that the world needs and you don't know you have it. And you won't know
Mm.
it till you're 35. So he saw a future for me. So unconditional positive regard, not based on my producing anything, a future for me that I didn't see. And then he looked at me and I'm crying because I'm not used to compassion. And I couldn't
Okay.
look at him. I couldn't look at him. And he says, look at me. And he points his finger at me and he says, you won't know how much the world needs you till you're 35, but you're going to make it till you're 35. And you deserve to be on this planet. And then he looked at me and he said, and you're going to let me help you. If he had said, call me if I can help you, I had a lot of that false pride. I probably wouldn't have called him. And, there's a good chance I wouldn't be here today. But that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the trifecta: an unconditional, unwavering, positive belief in me that I didn't have. He saw a future for me that I didn't see, and he was willing to go to bat for me against the medical school at his own expense. So he had to stand up to the promotions committee and the head of the school and say, "We're giving this one a second chance."
Wow.
And so
Mm.
something clicked in me. Uh, and uh, and he stood up for me. And there's a little melodramatic story here. He said, "You're going to have to." He says, "I'm going to say that to the promotions committee, but you have to come in and make a case for you why they should give you a second chance when everybody's against it." And so
Mm-hmm.
the head of the promotions committee was the head of surgery of one of the big hospitals in Boston. And everybody hated this guy. I mean, he was like, he was condescending, arrogant. He was obese, smoked a cigar.
Mm.
Kind of the caricature of a real tough, smart surgeon. And so these doctors are asking me questions, and I can see, I didn't know in those days that committees have agendas, and so I can see he wants to push along, and so he starts asking me questions. And he's drilling me, and in retrospect, I think the other doctors were more kind of sympathetic, but he was running the show. And he said, so it looks like you're never going to be a doctor. Why don't we just cut our losses? You go your way, we'll go our way. Why should we give you a second chance? And he said it in a pretty rough way, smoking his big, thick
Mm-hmm.
stogie. And I looked at him and I said, it's been kind of a rough year. I had a wife. She cut her losses. I mean, I guess she saw me the way you're seeing me. My dad came down with cancer and, looks like it's going to be okay. I came down with Graves' disease and they shot me up with a bunch of thyroid. They shot me up with something to lower my hyperthyroid. And then I got liver problems from what they shot me up with. And he's going, so.
Wow.
And I don't think I was complaining. I was just laying out the facts. So if you can picture this whole group around me, and I'm in the tribunal. I'm little David. And here was my slingshot. And I didn't know how much people couldn't stand him. And he's saying, so what? And I don't know what got into me. And I looked up at him and I said, I don't know that I want to be a doctor. I don't know that I don't want to be a doctor. And so I'd like to plead insanity and throw myself on the mercy of a room of doctors. And I just stared at him. Tears came rolling down my cheek. He went silent, put out his cigar, spun his chair around, and wouldn't look at me or anybody else in the room. And so the dean of students came over to me and said, Mark, go sit outside. I'll tell you what we come up with. Now realize they lose matching funds when people take a leave of absence. So I go out there and have my, I'm like this little waif sitting in one of the stairwells with my arm around the staircase. He comes out, the dean of students, he puts his arm around me and he said, Mark, take a year, take 5 years. You will always be welcome back here. So I took a year off and I went to a place called the Menninger Foundation, which is still around. It's now in Houston, but back then it was in Topeka. And I apparently had a knack. I mean, I grew up outside of Boston, in a suburb of Boston, but I was able to get through to schizophrenic farm young men and young women. I mean, I didn't know anything about that. And I remember asking the psychiatrist there, is this legitimate? They said, what? I mean, this is not like anything I know in medical school. And they said, no, this is legitimate and you've got a knack. So I knew, well, I'll finish that. And then if I can finish medical school, I'll go become a psychiatrist. And years later, I met with the dean of students to thank him about 8-10 years later. And I remember I said, why did you go out on a limb for me? He said, because someone did it for me 35 years ago. And I've just been paying it forward. I said, why did they give me the 5-year thing? He said, we'd been trying to put that guy in his place forever. No one ever put him in his place the way you did. And when you did, we all looked around with a look that said, we can't lose this kid. He may be messed up. But what happened is I finished med school, went to UCLA, and I just paid it forward. And another one of my mentors was one of these people who was a death and dying specialist in suicide prevention and house calls he would send me on. And I tend to simplify things. So I even have a name for the approach. It's called surgical empathy. Because when someone is really suicidal, they form a psychological adhesion to death to take the pain away. It's not an attachment. Okay. It's like an adhesion, like after surgery, organs stick together. And they form this adhesion. Yeah. When I can't take it, I can't take it. And so they don't necessarily listen to reason or logic. And so you have to sever the adhesion. And so surgical empathy does that. And I have a very simple way, but hopefully not simplistic. You can be the judge of it. So to me, when I would see, well, even to this day, when I would see even my coaching clients, I realized the suicidal patients chose death because they couldn't make the hurt go away. And so if I could lessen the hurt so it was tolerable. They could let go of it. And once they let go of it, they could start thinking about other options.
Mm.
But they often won't let go of it if you treat it from the outside in. So I found a way of going and joining them as the dean of students did with me, joining them in the dark night of the soul,
Mm-hmm.
seeing, finding their goodness, because these weren't bad people. These weren't sociopaths. These weren't drug addicts. These were just really down, suicidal people.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing a future for them that they couldn't see, uh, and then grabbing them emotionally by the nape of the neck and saying, "You're not going anywhere."
Mm.
So
Similar to what that dean did for you.
absolutely. So can I share an anecdote that you might find
Yeah.
interesting? So Dr. Schneidman used to refer me. He'd go up, he'd do a consultation, and and these people, in order to be discharged, had to be accepted by a psychiatrist who would see them. And he would often refer them to me because a lot of the other psychiatrists just didn't want to see him because they were scared that once out of the hospital, they'd kill themselves.
Mm.
And there was one woman, this is not her name, I'll call her Nancy. And she'd made several suicide attempts, and I didn't think I was helping her at all. She'd come in the office. She wouldn't make eye contact with me. She would be looking, 30 degrees to the left or the right like this. She wasn't catatonic, but she wasn't
Mm-hmm.
all there. And in those
Mm-hmm.
days, I used to moonlight once a month in a state hospital, pick up some extra money, and I'd cover for the doctors and, and do admissions and write orders when someone was tearing up one of the inpatient units. And so I saw her on a Monday after I hadn't slept for about 36 hours. And so there's Nancy, in her usual state, not looking at me. And as I was seated in the room with her, all the color turned to black and white. So I'm looking out in the room and it's black and white. And I get these chills, and I thought I was having a stroke or a seizure. And she wasn't looking at me, so I did a neurologic exam on myself. I'm looking at my fingers to see if I have double vision. I'm tapping my elbows. And I thought to myself, I'm all here. I'm not having a stroke or seizure. Then I had this crazy idea that I was looking out at the world emotionally through her eyes and feeling what she felt.
Mm.
And so because I was sleep deprived, I blurted this out to her. I said, Nancy, I didn't know it was so bad. And I can't help you kill yourself. But if you do, I'll still think well of you. I'll miss you. And maybe I'll understand why you had to get out of this pain. And I thought, did I think that or did I say that? And I thought, I just gave her permission.
Right.
And then she looked at me for the first time. I mean, she looked right into me like I'm looking into my camera lens at you. And I thought she was going to say, thank you for understanding. I'm long overdue.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, if you can really understand why I might have to kill myself to get out of this pain, maybe I won't need to. And then she smiled. And then the color came back in the room. The warmth came back. And I grabbed onto her eyes. And I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm not going to give you any treatments because you've had all the treatments, unless you suggest, maybe we should try meds, or maybe we should try shock treatment or something. But I'm not
Mm.
going to give you any treatment unless you say maybe we should try something. Would that be okay? And we're locking eyes. And she said, uh-huh. And then I leaned into her eyes and I grabbed onto her through her eyes. And I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find you wherever you are. And I'm going to keep you company there. Because I just don't want you to be alone there. Would that be okay? Would that be okay? And then she turned a corner. And so,
And
go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to say, how does that relate to the surgical empathy? How do you, thinking about that story, we can draw our own assumptions, but for somebody who did it for, as you said, 35 years and never lost somebody, I think the magic might lie in that surgical nature.
Well, the
So
surgical
tell
was
us
going
how, yeah.
was going in to where she was at a point of maximum pain that was only going to be relieved as she killed herself. But when she felt less alone, I make a distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is pain.
Okay.
Suffering is often feeling utterly alone in the pain. And if you can somehow alleviate the aloneness, you can alleviate suffering they can't live with and turn it into pain they can. I'm going to give you, you seem like a game guy. I'm going to give you a little taste of surgical empathy with you.
Sure.
You ready? Right. This is
ready.
You're right. This is much more superficial. You're listening to me, doing a great job, by the way. And you're asking questions that I think your audience would be interested in. But underneath you listening to me and asking me questions, which is respectful, thoughtful, and, somewhat transactional, you're listening for something underneath you listening to me. And let me take a guess what it is, and you tell me if it's right.
Okay.
I think you want to honor the trust and confidence and time of your listeners and viewers. One of the last things you want to
100%.
do is insult them or waste their time. And you're listening for guests who, after they listen or watch the episode, they'll say, that was a good use of my time. That was a good one. I want to see more of those. In fact, I'm going to tell more people to do your podcast. And so you're listening for guests that will give them that experience. And you're also protective of your audience. So I don't think this is a problem because you do a thorough job of checking on your guests. But you're listening for that guest who may be a best-selling author, but they're real stiff. I mean, they are awful. and you think to yourself, I got to protect my audience. I can't do this to them. I'm going to have to go back and, I don't like these confrontations. I can't delegate it to someone. I got to say, we couldn't use the interview. And so is any of that true, that you're listening for those things because you want to honor and pay back trust, confidence, and the gift of their time to you?
100%. In fact, I can't say that was always the case, because I think earlier on I was more concerned with, I don't know, doing it right or what I want or something like that, where we've been doing it so long that I'd say 5 to 8 years ago. So maybe the halfway point is when I now try to hold the duality of, carrying on a good conversation for the purpose of what we're doing, while also thinking, if I were listening, what is going through my head? What is my vantage point? What am I hearing? where am I in my life? What would I need to hear next for it to be of value to me? So absolutely.
So when I gave you that challenge that I'm going to read your mind at what you're listening for, and you
Mhm,
said 100%, I think 3 times. So,
mhm.
what was the experience that I kind of got it right and got you right in terms of your values?
Yeah, the first I was actually a little shocked. I was like, "Well, why would you know that?" Because even I didn't it took me a long time to realize that. So, how would you know that when it took me years to know that? And then my mind went, "Well, he has a podcast. Maybe he just through his own experiences knows what it's like to be in my shoes." And that's where my mind went.
Uh, well, I've checked you out too, and
Mhm,
yes, you want to be successful. Yes, you want to grow your podcast, but you
mhm.
also and you want to make $1, but you also want to make a difference.
Yeah.
Comes across.
Mm.
You're not. Uh, uh, yeah, I'm sure you're much more successful than me. In fact, I was going to joke with
No.
you. No, I was going to joke with you. You know, I can't be a guest on your podcast. Well, why, Mark? I'm not smart. And, and, no,
Yeah,
and no,
right.
here and no, here's my evidence. I
Uh-huh.
will I will cop to being somewhat wise, but
Mm.
s- but smart people make all the money, so therefore I am not smart.
I like that analogy. I like that.
Wise people, hopefully kind of know what's important, and if we are wise in our lives, we'll try to align ourselves with what's important. So at the end of
Mhm.
our life, we don't have that many regrets. But I have failed at smart.
Hmm. Based on societal standards, perhaps. I mean, I have to tell you that your distinction between wise and smart, although I think, at least the way I interpret it, somewhat tongue in cheek, and I would disagree. But I do think that your definition of wise is what I strive for. And I actually would say that one of the reasons I was super interested in talking to you is because I think it's very hard to remain wise in today's society. I think I was just having a conversation with somebody earlier today about the higher you go up in an organization or in your career, we all know of the golden handcuffs, but it's much more than that, right? In trying to live an authentic life that you feel you are adding value while also meeting the responsibilities you have as an individual, whether it be as a parent or a spouse or whatever it is. I feel like it's a really tough, um, tight wire, to walk.
So here's one first of hopefully several tips that you'll find helpful. Uh,
Good.
my first book, several of my books are evergreen bestsellers. None of them were bestsellers out of the gate. They just grow on people, and people, refer them and say you better check out this book. So my first book was called Get Out of Your Own Way. I think it's now sold about 300,000 copies or so. And one of the
Wow.
chapters is called, uh, and there are 40 chapters that are self defeating behaviors. And one of the chapters is called Trying to Take Care of Everybody.
Mm,
And my books have these, at the end of each chapter, something called a usable insight, which is an insight you can actually use, as opposed to that's interesting, or in
hmm
addition to that's interesting. So a usable insight is smart as well as wise.
There you go.
Yeah, and so I think the end of that chapter is uh, every nobody in your life competes for importance. They all compete for time. And the key is to develop the muscle of being 100% present when you're a dad, when you're a
Mm,
husband, when you're a podcaster. And so the key is how to be completely present. In that chapter I talked about years ago, there was a fellow who juggled chainsaws in Venice, California. And to do that right, you better know when to grab it, know when to hold, know when to let go.
mhm.
And lawyers do that, doctors do that. They go from one chart into the next, and they can't keep dragging one client into the next. And so you can develop that skill of being completely present, because when you drag in, you're preoccupied with work into your family, or you're preoccupied with your family at work, you're cheating everyone out of your undivided attention.
Hmm.
So
So,
here's a
so would you
daunting.
say? Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
I
go
want to
ahead.
give you uh, so here's a daunting challenge, especially uh, a lot of the men I know who are somewhat entrepreneurial. They say they smile and they say, "That's a little bit too daunting, Mark." And so the idea, and hopefully you'll say, "Nope, uh, uh, I did well on that one, Mark." But the challenge is you go to your spouse and you say, have I ever been so distracted and preoccupied uh, that you wanted to get my undivided attention about something that was important and there was no way you could get it? They're going to go, what?
I mean, I already know the answer to that.
Yeah,
Of course, I
yeah,
do that
yeah.
fairly often.
Oh, yeah. They're going to say, what? So you're going to do this homework and get back to me. They're going to say, what?
Hmm.
Yeah, I had someone on the show and he asked me to ask you this. Uh, uh, Give me an example of me at my worst when you really had something important to tell me and there was just no way to get my attention. Now, sometimes, if they still love you as opposed to they're just frustrated with you, they'll say, yeah, but you're busy, you're a good person, you're such and such. And you say, well, I appreciate that, but I'm asking you, have I ever made you feel that way? Yes.
Mm.
And when I make you feel that way, does it ever hurt in addition to be frustrating? Yes. Is that something that I do fairly often? Well, not as, no, don't let me off the hook.
Hmm.
Yes. Um, and then often your spouse is not going to look at you because they're going to be crying
Mm.
because they're feeling relief. That what you're saying is you deserve my undivided attention. A lot of times I don't give it to you. And then you say to her, look at me. What? No, look at me. And then you look into her eyes, which might be a little bit tearful, and you think to yourself, what have I done to that young woman I fell in love with? What the heck have I done? And then you look at her and say, you deserve better than this, and I'm going to fix it. I don't know how, but I'm going to fix it, and I'm sorry. Now you can understand some of my entrepreneur friends saying that's a little bit too courageous.
Yeah, I kind of was thinking that. I was like, all right, this I got my night cut out for me.
Hey, Chris, you pull this off, you might get lucky tonight.
Well, in that case, you better believe we're having that conversation. No, the one thing I will say,
That got your
go ahead.
that got your undivided attention. Go on.
It always does. Well, I think about this often, if I'm working from home and she's got the baby and things like that, and I go downstairs for a cup of coffee. It's 11 a.m. I've just been on 2 hours of calls. I know I got 3 more hours coming up. And she'll say, hey, I want to talk to you about, you know, I don't know, weekend plans. And often I'm kind of not paying attention. I'll say, look, I'm in work mode right now. I really can't think about this. Um, you know, I justify that in that it's hard to transition. It's hard for me to transition my brain from this and that and this and that. Uh, so it leads to a fragmentation, but I think it's also sometimes a requirement based on how complex our lives are, how many different hats we have to wear
Okay.
nowadays.
Okay. Here's the intervention. Okay. Because it's,
Okay.
because when you respond that way, it's not exactly, Love Island going to happen after that. Um, so see, there's always a way to open people up. I was also a former FBI hostage negotiation trainer. So I've done a bunch of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what
Mm-hmm.
you say to her, this is what you say. You go, you can say, damn, you could say, damn it. That is worth my undivided attention, and I can't give it to you now.
Mm.
And I don't want to be distracted or make an excuse. That's worth my undivided attention. I'll tell you, I'll be finished in about 3 hours or such and such. And would you run it by me then?
Mm-hmm.
That could go over slightly better than the other one.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not saying it's the right approach. I'm curious, in the various stories that you've told us and the examples provided, there's a what do they call it? There's a through there's a thread that goes throughout it, right? And I could take a guess. I could try to analyze what I think that thread is. But I'm curious on what you believe that thread to be. What is the universal approach? Universal might not be the right word, but what is the general approach you are bringing into these relationships that you feel adds so much value, that you've seen impact people in a positive way?
Well, I mentioned it to you about 2 stories ago. Uh, there's a universal truth that whenever you're with someone, one on one on five, one on 1,000, that underneath they're listening to you, they're listening for something. And they're often not conscious of what they're listening for. But if you know it's always operating, just stopping yourself and knowing it's there and being curious about it without an agenda, that's such a unicorn in communication that they will engage with you. So I do presentations, trainings. I kind of mentor someone who's the head of an accelerator of, I don't know, a couple hundred startups.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has me every 6 months, I do a presentation to a cohort. About 2 weeks ago, I did a presentation to, it was sort of a roundup of about 100 founders. And one of the things I told them, and they're right at the stage of trying to get money from investors.
Mm.
So they've used up friends and family money, but now they got to go out to people who they don't know. And I said, how many of you start a presentation and within 3 slides, the investor or investors are smiling at you and you think it's a yes?
Mm.
You're smiling. And I say, it's not a yes. They don't have a sense of humor. It's about money. They're smiling because they don't want to be rude because you're on slide 3 of a 35 slide deck. They already know it's a no. They don't want to insult you to say, well, I'm finished, because they know how much time you put into that slide deck and they don't care. But
Right.
you're kind of stuck because you're an engineer and you got to see things through, even if they've fallen asleep at slide 21. So here's what you want to do. And you can do this in lots of conversations. When you get a hint that they're smiling and your experience tells you it is not a yes, what you do is you stop the slide and you say, why don't we stop for a second? they're going to get nervous because you caught them not trying to be rude.
Mm.
What? And here's what you say to them. So here's the thread about listening for something. And you say, when I started this presentation, you were listening for something and you didn't hear it. In fact, there's signs that I'm getting further away from it. And so you're thinking, I'm never going to hear it. And can you tell me what you were listening for? Because we actually might have it in slide 38, but you will have been asleep for 15 slides. So can you tell us what you're looking for or listening for? And if we have it, I'll let you know. And if we don't have it, I'm in a cohort of lots of businesses and I can make introductions. And I'm not looking to get a referral fee. I'm just looking to make you successful, make the people in my cohort successful. And I'll make an introduction if what you're looking for is not me, as someone else. And now the investor is thinking, well, why would you do that? Well, because if I do that, you'll take my call in the future. Because I'm focused on your success. And I'm just hoping that, what my product or service is will be part of your success. And then I didn't let it go at that. So and I say, let them tell you what they're looking for. And then you say, nah, that's not what you're listening for. What am I listening for? You're listening for the unicorn to make up for all the losers. You're listening for that company, that startup where you go back to your boss and say, I think this is the one. And so what I tell people, when you have a startup, reverse engineer from that investor going back to their boss saying, I think this is the one. What the heck do they have to see or learn? And it's not about what your company does. For them, it's a return on investment. And so it's not just, now you can be passionate about your company, but let's face it, unless it is a cure for peace, poverty and starvation, it's an investment. So the thread is, here's another tip that if you listen to this and if you try this, Chris, it will change your life in a week. So can I give you another tip?
Absolutely. With that lead off, definitely.
So this is called the HUVA exercise, HUVA. And I think it's in Just Listen. And so every day, pick a conversation that you want to go really, really well from their point of view. Because if it goes really, really well from their point of view, they're going to want more of you. If it goes really, really well from your point of view and you didn't pick up when they were smiling, it was because they couldn't wait to get away from you. Then you better read some emotional intelligence books. So every day pick one conversation, could be with your spouse. We could get you a double lucky tonight. Have a cocktail before.
There you go.
And the Hoover exercise is, I'm going to have a conversation with this person, and at the end of this conversation, from their point of view, they're going to rate me 10, 10, 10, 10 on Hoover. H, they're going to feel that I heard them out. I didn't interrupt them. I wasn't distracted. So they're going to feel like I heard them out. U, they're going to feel like I actually understood them. By the way, you're doing a very good job with me. You got to take this home, though. So, because you're hearing me out, even when you have something to say, if I'm on a roll, you'll be able to stop and say, no, go ahead. So you're hearing me out, even if I'm being a little bit rude. part of it's my ADD. I don't want to lose what I'm about to say. Uh, you're showing under. I know you're laughing. Me too. You get that too. Yeah. So the U is how well did they feel understood? And so you show that by asking someone to elaborate. So you said, so what's the
Mm,
thread? What's the
mm,
commonality? So I felt like, ooh, he's really understanding me. V is that person felt that you valued what they had to say. So rather than taking issue with it, and I'm not saying you should roll over and say everything is great, but you valued it because you were seeing a way that whatever they're saying could really be useful to you in your life. So you're showing value. And the
mhm,
A is on a scale of 1 to 10, you added value. So you might say, Mark, this listening stuff and people listening for, have you ever thought of taking this to Congress?
mm. Good
I
luck.
mean, but you're adding value because you're saying, oh, I think I'm seeing something that you can't see that could really use what you have.
Mhm.
And so after the conversation with this person, you rate yourself. Don't beat up on yourself because none of this stuff comes natural. Comes pretty natural to you because you're a great podcast host.
I appreciate
Uh,
that.
you've done very well in the Hoove exercise.
Mm,
Uh, but if you do this once a day intentionally with one conversation for a week, I think you're going to notice something. You're going to say, wow, you're going to notice the other person being engaged, being appreciative, being thankful. Uh, and
mm.
hopefully you'll notice I might not have closed a deal in this conversation, but this was a good conversation. It could lead to something.
Right. Which, building that rapport and building those relationships is what one of the things we're talking about, right? Of being wise. And that's one of the lasting things that will you can not only carry with you, but all the studies have shown that the more relationships you have throughout life is directly going to correlate to things like happiness and longevity. So it's an investment in, you know, your time on the planet, if you will.
Which brings me to Michelangelo dying.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I've already got you figured out. He's thinking, how the heck is he going to connect those dots?
I'm actually more interested in it. I'm like, all right, I'm here for that. Let's go.
Well, that's because you really are great at this. So uh, I'm getting interviewed a lot on this, and we haven't even talked about it. My mortality. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be admitted for something called a bone marrow transplant because I'm heading for acute myeloid leukemia.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, well, you're probably saying, why didn't we spend the whole episode on this, Mark? Uh, and I'm psychologically, emotionally, mentally the best I've ever been in my life by far.
Mm,
No depression, no anxiety, no fear, 100% peace of mind. Uh, and what contributed to it is I have an amazing doctor. I think if I had a lousy doctor who I was afraid to ask questions to, I wouldn't be at peace. But I found someone, he's got 265 five-star patient reviews.
wow.
So, uh, and I have a YouTube and TikTok channel called I'm Dying to Tell You because I'm just sharing things I've learned over a lifetime. So my first episode, I think I'm up to about 54 on YouTube, is
Hmm.
called Michelangelo Dying. And just as Michelangelo saw the angel in a piece of marble and carved till he set it free, I saw what's important in life inside a ton of stuff that is unimportant. And I just cut the
Mhm.
unimportant stuff away.
Mm.
And what's important shined through. And I'm getting back on this was the longest tangent you've let me take on this episode. What I discovered is friends, family, uh, not just they're knowing you love them, but they're feeling you love them.
Mm.
A lot of times that's missing. Oh, I know my parent. Oh, blah 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 blah. You get to the end of your life. Well, how how much did you feel seen by your dad and emotionally connected to? Well, that wasn't his deal.
Mm.
I know, I know. You're making excuses. Well, we could have been a lot closer, but he didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. And so it is what it is. So part of my commitment is to help people not wait too long. I'm hearing from a lot of people, oh, I was so busy, too busy to listen to my spouse, but I stopped everything to go to the hospice and hold my dad's hand for 3 days.
Mm.
And it was probably the most powerful time in my life.
Mhm.
Well, it's too bad you waited so long.
Right.
So I'm here. So that's one of the things I'm trying to teach people is don't wait too long for these things.
Right.
And I know it's exciting. I just wrote a blog called uh, "High Tech, Low Touch, and Loneliness." And I talked about how high tech, especially the CEOs of high tech,
Mhm.
uh, they all have features of being on the spectrum. They're not good at emotionally relating,
Mhm.
but they love algorithms, and they addicted the world to adrenaline.
Mm.
And you have to keep feeding adrenaline by consumption. And you want more and more and more. And what's happened, we're in a oxytocin famine because it takes too much time to care about someone else's feelings by listening and finding out what they're feeling.
Right.
It takes too much time to just let your spouse talk without giving a solution or advice that she doesn't want. And it's epidemic.
And do you think the impacts of that aren't felt as much until there is a defining moment in your life? As in, that spouse decides to leave you, you get a diagnosis, you're, lonely on a holiday, those types of things is what when we as humans are only at that point are we willing to kind of to sit back and look at the cause of said predicament.
Well, that's why I have a podcast called My Wake Up Call.
Mhm.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's true. It's uh, I belong to a couple entrepreneurial communities. They're all men. It's not misogynistic at all. It just meets on Saturdays, the main meeting. And
Mhm.
a lot of times, women are with the kids while the husbands are doing this, and the majority of them have been married a few times,
Mhm.
and I really like them. I mean, I enjoy their energy, and they're really into excitement.
Hmm.
Um, and they just can't grok closeness,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
uh, it's interesting. I'm in a few communities in which I'm kind of seen as the sage, the wise person,
Right.
you know, they're glad I'm a member, but they wouldn't want their sister to marry me because I'm too emo.
That's funny.
Actually, they probably would like their sister to
Yeah.
marry me instead of the stiff that she's married to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note though, I think this is something I've figured out over the past 20 years, going from kind of young masculine jock to more of a empathetic type individual is I I don't think outwardly a lot of people will claim, admit, or even recognize that they value that person until they need that person to listen to them, right? In a world where people aren't as willing to spend time with you, focus on you, as you said, right? Provide that one-on-one, uninterrupted attention, then it's at those moments where people seek you out a little bit. Um, I just had a coaching conversation this morning for an hour with a leader who's in a really tough spot. And, I felt this really cool sense of responsibility that this person decided she wanted to talk to me about this, despite the fact we don't know each other that well. And she must have felt the fact that when we met or when we meet and when we have this conversation like we did this morning, it, it will be solely for her, right? I wasn't doing it for any selfish reasons. There was none. There was not, and so I just mentioned that because, as you said, too, emo. There have been at times, especially as a man, that I felt like, oh, I wish I was a little less emotional, if you will. It's a weird way of putting it, but I think the older I get, the more I appreciate that aspect of myself, and I think others tend to see it too when they need to.
Yeah, I'm in a number of projects, and one of them is I'm the co-founder. We might want to talk about this because you might like. I'm the co-founder of the Deeper Coaching Institute,
I looked that
and
up. I saw that. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a division of On Global Leadership. So this is the coaching arm. Given that I'm going into the hospital, uh, I'm looking for people who this appeals to, and what it's about is that you know frequently, especially in the executive coaching thing, it focuses on
Mhm.
strategy and tactics, and that's all important. You want to be successful, but not infrequently you discover something about yourself that you didn't know. Someone holds a mirror up to you, and they're supportive of you, so they can do it in a way that you can accept it, and it introduces you to things. So, for instance, I've given you a few tips. I want to give you a parenting tip or two. Uh,
Mhm.
if you try them, you say, wow, that really made a difference. Wow, we were kind of glib about it, two jocks, talking to each other. But
Mhm.
my wife did really tear up when I asked her if she couldn't get my undivided attention.
Right.
Did I ever make her
Yeah.
feel that she wasn't worth my undivided attention, if you want to really go into it? And so the Deeper
Mm.
Coaching Institute is for people, and we don't market or sell it. We mention it occasionally. So I'm mentioning it here. I could have forgotten it. For people who
Mhm.
want to go deeper. And
Mm.
and and because of my background, I know a little bit more about going deeper than, people who weren't trained as therapists or suicide prevention specialists. Because yeah, you can, the majority of coaches who don't have that background, especially if they're men, they can recognize, they can say, it sounds like you have some limiting beliefs, or it
Mhm.
sounds like, you might be able to benefit from this emotional intelligence training. And again, that's at the level of, talking to the person.
Right.
Uh,
Mhm.
and see where I where I would go with the person after I develop rapport. I'd say, how much has this already cost you? Really being lousy at this.
Mm.
Tell me a story of a relationship you'll never get back.
Right.
Hmm. So the Deeper Coaching Institute is for people who want to go deeper, because
Hmm.
it's just it's just benefiting them as a person, as opposed to someone who only wants to be successful.
Right. Well,
You could be good at that. You could be a deeper coaching person.
well, trust me. I mean, that's why I got into this field. I mean, that I initially, when I was, I don't know, 25ish, 20, well, I was more like 27, 28. I thought about, oh, I want to be a psychologist. And then I was like, it's a lot of school. I don't know. I don't know if they, it was just, so I said, I'll test the waters and I'll get certified as a coach, just a regular, it was through the Coactive Coaching Institute. So I did that and then got into consulting and leadership development and things like that. And now I do some senior leader development coaching type things. And I love the idea of going deeper. My struggle becomes, I find that, and I often reference this book, I think it's called The Psychopath Test, which is at the
Mhm.
higher levels of leadership. Uh, man, I'm not pleasantly surprised with the people. Let's just put it that way. Right. I think what it takes to get there sometimes is not my cup of tea. And so, do you find that those individuals are just as, what's the word? Are just as willing as the rest? It's just hidden under more layers, or are they truly uh, just in it for themselves?
Well, it's interesting. Uh, I'm not afraid to be playfully confrontational,
Mm-hmm.
and you often earn the respect of some people who don't respect too many people based on how you can confront them.
Mm.
So I remember someone who kind of fits your criteria, and I didn't know if they were a psychopath or not. And we were having lunch, I think, at the Beverly Hills Hotel, uh, and he was just really awful to the waitress. And we're talking, and I said, "I'm really giddy right now. I'm just really giddy." And he said, "What?" I said, "I'm really giddy because I don't work for you, and I never have to see you again." He said, "What?" I said, "I've been watching you. I mean, we have a conversation, and you have a way about you that I think flirts regularly with abuse.
Mm.
And and in my book, you want more, and I don't think you deserve what you already have.
Mm.
And I am not here to get you more. So I don't think you'd want to work with me." But he passed the sniff test. So he looks at me, he said, "Nobody's ever said that to me." I said, "Oh, but many have thought it."
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
And then he looks like this, he looks around, and he said, "Can it be fixed?" Because I already lost the marriage, a business, a
Wow.
partnership.
Mm.
I said, "It's an addiction." I said, "I think the best you can be is an asshole in recovery."
Somebody needs to tell these people that.
Yeah, yeah. And I said, and here's a good thing. Here's a good phrase to use. Uh, I say, people don't do what's important to them. They do what they care enough about. It's important to me, especially with my health issues, to exercise and eat healthily, but I don't care enough about it
Mm-hmm.
to do it as well as I should. Although as I approach, going in the hospital, and everyone is telling me, this is really important. I mean, this is your life. Uh,
Hmm.
I I think I finished my last bag of marshmallows,
Oh, what a
but
shame that is.
oh, they were great. Uh, but and I think a good way to approach people is to say that uh, people do what they care enough about,
Hmm.
and the way you know that someone cares enough about something is they take action. You don't have to nag them. And
Ah, good point. Yeah.
it's unclear to me that you care enough about some of the things we've talked about, even when you've agreed they'd give you these benefits. But it's unclear to me that you care enough about it to actually do it. And I'm not here to be a nag.
Right. See if they're willing.
Yeah. So here's a parenting tip, because I mentioned
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I could use some.
Uh, a good friend of mine is a fellow named Nolan Bushnell. He started Atari, Chuck E. Cheese. He was Steve Jobs' first boss. And
Wow.
I think uh, I'm on the board of advisors of 5 or 6 companies. And, uh, you know, and I don't even keep track of it. I mean, I don't even have a filing cabinet. So, they have me sign these things and they say, if we make money, you're going to get some. I said, well, give it to my widow. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think I'm on the board. I am on the board of advisors of an education company that he started. But he gave me these great tips that I didn't use with my kids, but I thought they were brilliant. And he's quite a character. And he said, Mark, I graduated 247th in my engineering class of 247. So, either I was stupid or I was distracted, but grades really don't matter to me. And I told all my kids, grades don't matter. I don't want you to grow up and, piss away some of my money and flunk out, but grades really don't matter. He said, the only thing that matters is what you learn, what you did with it, and what was the result. So, what he did with his children, who have all done well, is, when they'd come home from school, and he said, don't ask them, how was school? What'd you learn today? He said, they hate, it's another question.
Hmm.
And you're just doing it to connect with them, but they've already had tons of questions. And that's why they say, fine, nothing. And what he would do instead is when his kids would come home, but in order to do this, you actually have to be curious. And he would say to his kids, teach me something you learned today. Not what did you learn today? Teach me something you learned today. And he said, and when you're enthusiastic about what they teach you, they light up. And then he would say, uh, uh, and as they got older, he would say, uh, what action did you turn that into? And what was the result? And don't expect the result to be great, because when we started Atari, Chuck E. Cheese, when we started out, it was junk, you know.
Mm.
But so teach me something you learn, and uh, find out what action they turned it into, and what was the result. And you're not judgmental; you're just curious. Because I'll tell you, I look back at, I can't even remember the classes I took in
Right.
college and what. Yeah, they were pre-med classes. I guess I had to take them to go to med school or something. But uh, or the classes I took to get into med school so I could get good enough grades, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So I thought that was wonderful. Some of the other thing that he did is he had 8 kids, and every Sunday he would take one of them out to brunch somewhere, to a place that they'd never been and he'd never been. And it would be at least 45 minutes away. And and he said, look, when you're with each other and you're stuck with each other for 45 minutes each way, you get into a conversation. and you're both discovering something as opposed to going to pick up food at the same restaurant every Sunday and you take it
Uh,
home. Uh, and he shared an anecdote that he took one of his daughters out. I think she was 7 or 8, and they drove somewhere, and they're having breakfast, and she leans over and she says, "Dad, they all look angry." And he looks around and he says, "We're in a fishing village. They just got off the boat." But I thought, wow, that's amazing.
yeah. No, it's somebody gave me similar advice about the spending time, and my son plays baseball, so oftentimes we'll, you know, I don't ask a lot of questions in the car. I just wait in the trip for what naturally comes out, and it's a good time to connect. I have to ask you. I've been wondering about this, which is, with your background, with the story we started the conversation with you in college, and with your the illness that you're facing. What do you know now? What is a lesson or a thing you value and now that you just could not have or did not know as an early adult? Like, because you go through these experiences with those of the people you worked with who were suicidal, and leaders, and your own mortality, and all these things, and learn through that experience. And there's so many listening right now that want to know all of that without having to earn it the hard way. And so I'm asking for the cheat code. What do you know now that you couldn't have or didn't know then?
How important it is to just listen.
Hmm.
I had 8 mentors. The last one was Larry King. I'd go to breakfast with him, with this quirky group of people, for a couple of years prior to the pandemic, and he was incredibly curious. People loved to be on his show because he never hit people with a gotcha,
Mm-hmm.
and he was just curious about everything. And he had opinions, and he would voice them at breakfast and all that. And and I had another mentor. You probably don't know the name. A fellow named Warren Bennis. Warren Bennis was kind of to leadership what Steve Jobs was to personal computers.
Hmm.
I mean, if you look up Warren Bennis, he was like one of the top 5 people. He mentored Howard Schultz, David Gergen, Tom Peters. He was, I think, one of the founders of the Kennedy School of Public Leadership or something. Uh, and I love to collect quotes. And one of my favorite Warren quote is, "Boredom occurs when we fail to make the other person interesting."
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I can't even tell you how good that is. For this, I mean, I'll probably edit this out of the podcast, but um, I find people fascinating, so I do the show, right? Almost everyone, and I learned it from my mom. And my mom has this really amazing superpower. She's got a ton of friends, a ton of people who, uh, you know, who will share with her and confide in her. And I've seen since I was a child, the reason is she genuinely, when she goes up to somebody, she assumes they're one of the most interesting people in the world. It's without fail. So she'll come back, she'll be like, "Chris, I met this guy, I met this woman, whatever, doesn't matter." And then she'll start telling me about this person, right? And they do this and they do this and they do this. And it's just, ever since I can remember, and anybody who knows her, like, that is going to happen in a conversation. And so I didn't realize that until this podcast that I had adopted that from her. And I also didn't realize that that wasn't normal. Like, so people would say to me random things like, well, you know, something like, "Why do you want to talk to all these people?" Or, "How can you care?" What? And I always just thought that's insane. I'm like, but how do you not? Like, if you if you pull on anybody's experience and you can't be amazed, it's your fault. It's not theirs. So I love that quote. It perfectly sums up my belief, which is really cool.
Well, I'm glad. Well, I hope you
Yeah.
do keep it in the podcast. Yeah. Yeah.
I might.
Here's another quote, because I collect quotes,
Uh-huh.
and that's close to the top. But the top quote, and one of my episodes of I'm Dying to Tell You, you can look this up, is comes from a woman named Dr. Shawnee Duperon, and she founded Project Forgive with Desmond Tutu. Archbishop Desmond Tutu
Mm.
was nominated for a Nobel Prize.
Yep.
And she didn't originate the quote, but I'm giving her the credit for it because she's done so much with it. And it's, forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive.
Also a good one. I like that.
Well, that's profound, because when she told me that, I made peace with my father 25 years after he died, because I accepted the apology that I never received, that I think he would give me, which is,
Mm-hmm.
he was a guy who was better with numbers. He was a guy who, wasn't all that skilled interpersonally. He could be a little
Mm-hmm.
critical, when you pulled him into something that he wasn't confident about. And so he could put down my creativity because I'm a little bit wacky. And the apology that I accepted that I never received was, remember when I used to put you down? You'd come up with these crazy ideas, Mark, and I'd say something dismissive like, well, what does that have to do with anything? I can't believe what you've done with your life, Mark, and the people you've touched, the lives you've saved. I don't deserve you as my son,
Mm.
and I'm sorry. And he would say that. He would say that. But here was the real insight. I didn't realize that it's not a full forgiveness until I asked his forgiveness. So after I imagined him saying that to me and I accepted it, I said, I owe you an apology. I held a bit of a chip on my shoulder about some things. I used you as an excuse.
Mm.
You did the best you could. And given all the worries you had, raising a family, supporting a family, and I know what that's like, my own family, I should have known better. I mean, I'm the freaking psychiatrist in the family, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I want to apologize to you for that grudge, and I can finally say and feel it when I say I miss you.
Mm. What was the quote on that?
Forgiveness is accepting the apology you will never receive.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's powerful.
Well, you've been a great
Well,
host.
Mark, I got it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate it. I'm sitting here going, man, I got so many more things I want to ask. The natives are getting restless. It is bedtime here, and if I do not help, then trust me, none of these conversations I have with my wife will be valuable.
Okay. Quick bedtime. You'll fire me, but quick bedtime story. If you give your kids bedtime story, and you probably, I'm betting you already do this because, but if you read them a story,
Mm-hmm.
Before the story, you say, what was the thing that, what was the best thing that happened to you today? And what was the worst thing that happened to you today? And you don't give them advice. You just let them talk about it. And you say, wow, that's amazing. And, oh, geez, I'm sorry that happened to you. What are you most excited about tomorrow, and what are you most nervous about?
Hmm.
Because that teaches them perspective that good and bad things happen every day. And then you can follow up on it, and then you seal it with the story.
Mm.
So you finish up with the story, and because what you want to do is you want to have them internalize, oh, talking things out like this actually feels better. And the net result is they develop perspective.
Okay. I'm going to add that into the routine. I like that. Mark,
Well, the
you've got
native, the restless, what can I tell you?
well, you've got one of the things before I let you go, I read your bio multiple times and I was like, I can't keep track of all this. You got books, you got podcasts, you all the things. You tell us, right? What are the things you are most wishing people go find of your work?
Um, yeah, there is a lot of stuff. I personally, uh, on YouTube, it's I'm dying to tell you, Dr. Mark. I think that's the thing. And it has these videos that I'm sharing, and they just come to me almost every day. And then TikTok,
Mm,
there's I think my handle is at Dr. Mark, and it's I'm dying to tell you there. And so I'm just sharing
okay.
some of the stuff that I've shared on the show here, and I'm not monetizing it. I don't care about that. I will say it delights me to see that some of them have more than 10 views, 15 views,
Right.
and
Yeah.
and they can check out my podcast, my wake up call. But I'm getting more requests to be a guest because I go on so many tangents.
Well, because it's a fascinating thing too. Like that's what I'm gonna reach back out and a couple months or a year or something, have you back on. Because I want to dig into. I mean, I got so many places to go. I want to talk about hostage negotiation and how that links to suicide prevention, and so more to come. But for now, we'll have to let this hour plus suffice. So, Mark, first, I want to say thanks so much. And then, second, I also want to say best of luck with the upcoming surgery. I hope everything works out for you.
Uh, Thank you. Warren Bennis told me that when people say something nice, don't go neurotic on them. So there's two words. Thank you.
There you go. That's all that's needed.